Well, everyone, welcome to Alumni Chats. This is a new podcast by the University Observer, in which we interview esteemed UCD alumni about how their student days impacted their current careers. Now, we have the pleasure of interviewing comedian and television host Dara Ó Briain. O'Brien co-founded our newspaper along with Pat Leahy, and we talked to O'Brien about some absolutely hilarious topics like pandemics, mental health, unemployment, and we also talked to O'Brien about his days in UCD. So, sit back, relax, and we hope you enjoy.
But of all the people who would queue up to fuck me over, I would imagine the University Observer wouldn't be the first one on the list. The first version was Catcher. I don't expect to be fucked over by the University Observer. There's your headline. What do you actually want to talk about, by the way? Is there anything specific?
Well, I suppose, to start off, I suppose it'd be interesting to ask you, what exactly compelled you and Pat Leahy to set up the University Observer?
Well, really, it was because there was another publication that came out briefly beforehand. Look, there was already a newspaper there called the Students' Union News, and there was a College Tribune, which is the independent one, which I think still goes. And then friends of ours were involved. Now, we were coming to the end of our college days, much like yourself, and we had been very much involved in things, and we're quite happy to see if we could remain involved in things. And that's all in quotation marks, but as in like we've all been involved in debating and all these kind of things. And it kind of was crystallizing what the hell do you actually want to do with our lives. And then we saw the Students' Union News. There were other friends of ours who had taken over the Students' Union News and tried to put it on a slightly more it was very much an in-house rag. It was very, very uninteresting to people or whatever. And they tried to shift it to an independent kind of thing. And we thought, look, you could properly do this. And we pitched it to the student union because the two of us were at a point where we could take the year, gad about the college, but actually stick this thing on a proper professional footing. And so we came up with a kind of a manifesto, essentially, a kind of a mission statement, I think is the term you'd use now for it, like whatever, of look, it should be out regularly, it should be expectedly out once every 2 weeks. And there's a point where I could do this rant. I think I did it in a bar once to try to impress a woman. It should be this, it should be this, it should be this, it should be this. It was like very much we had this thing that we knew that look, you could do this. It was a resource that wasn't used, but let us do it, because we were sort of in that Dublin in the 90s. Where the hell is there work anyway? Sure, look, we don't emigrate. Look, but we can do this, and we could do this very, very well, and it could be another year in UCD doing stuff. And so it was a combination of those kind of things, and so we pitched it to them, and they went for it. And like, we had various scraps at them about independence over the course of the year, as have continued ever since. But the gist was get it out regularly, get it out in a kind of a professional way. I obviously did a lot more kind of the features and light-hearted pieces in terms of the writing, and then lots of sub-editing. Ed Pat was looking after, was very much more the news agenda on the whole thing. And then we just nicked the best people we could from a whole generation of people from the two newspapers, some of whom went on to edit them as well. So the other principle was, steal good people and work long nights when you have to. So it was it was sort of that the opportunity presented itself, and we, I wouldn't like to say the large part of it was we were very happy in UCD, and we were very happy to do another year in UCD. But it wasn't as if it was like, this is 1994. It's not as if like there were jobs flying around the place. So we thought, well, look, he went into the law, I went into do science, and we kind of wanted to complete the journey to our latter degrees, to our latter careers.
Right, I see. And you mentioned writing features, etc. Were there any particular topics that you were particularly interested in getting publicized?
Well, we did. God Almighty, Jesus, what is it now? 25 years ago. It is literally 25 years ago. No, I didn't go with any particular agenda. I wasn't writing campaigning features, but actually we had people who were doing that for us. I mean, because they were very much news at the start, then campaigning features, then more G2 type color and fun and kind of things. We had a few good pieces on access to university and how going out to schools. We had one of our riders go to schools that traditionally the take wasn't very, very high, to go, look, why aren't people coming into from these parts of the world, and why aren't you, that was a sort of a campaign we did. But it was kind of weird. I can't remember that we specifically had a thing, because we were covering the university was changing a lot at the time. In terms of like just the structure of it, the semesterization thing, which I think is standard now, was only just coming in, because it used to be just 1 year pass through, and then suddenly they were carving the whole academic year up, so that became a kind of a running thing throughout it all. But honestly, a lot of it is, with respect to a lot of it is university politics is so savage because the stakes are so low. That quote, there's a touch of it now that I can't quite remember what was, but it was enormously important at the time. Weirdly, the story I always remember was the one about the poltergeist, or the exorcism. That there was an exorcism in one of the flats in Belgrade. What's the one? What are the two university? What are the two villages?
I believe one of them is Roebuck, and the other one, was it Roebuck, this poltergeist?
No, it wasn't a Roebuck. It was oh god, there's one beginning with an M, isn't there? There's Belgrove or Belmont.
Melville or something like that, isn't it?
Yeah, that one, right? That one. And what to us is the newer one. Was just been built, and there was some incident with writing in red lipstick on a mirror, and weird rose petals arriving, and somebody called a priest in to perform an exorcism, and we rang the RAs to go, is this true? And they said, it's a private matter, and slammed the phone down. So that was my favorite story. We could never quite get corroboration on it, but it was my favorite story, that at some point there was a poltergeist in the UCD village, and the Merville, it's called Merville, isn't it?
Sorry, yeah, Merville.
There you go. Yeah, you're the one that's in the college. So anyway, Merville was may still be haunted, but they covered it up. And so there were things that I quite enjoyed picking out of it. But like it was. Trust Ed's. Keep saying Ed. It wasn't Ed. It was Pat. Trust Pat's judgment. 11 of the 12 front pages got picked up by the Nationals. Partly because we sent them to the Nationals. We made a point of making sure that we could, and they were delighted to take Nick stories off us. So so we got some good stories in, actually. But it wasn't. I don't think we went in with a campaigning bent. I think the paper had been probably a bit too mired in that already, because it would basically be a mouthpiece for whatever the student union was doing, and so we wanted to shift away from that into being very much kind of a newspaper. For example, we dumped, and I know they're back, but we've dumped things like movie reviews and stuff, because there was always some sham who just wanted free tickets and stuff, and then would write. They were never very interesting or very illuminating, and they were done better by other people, so we dumped them. The things like that, like whatever that we thought, sure, look, this is just somebody going to the films and then writing an essay on it, like, let's lose this. And so we're very happy to be quite, scathing about stuff and just to carve the thing down a bit. It was great. It was like, there was times that it was among the most interesting kind of professional experiences, because it was like, you do a 36-hour day to get the thing actually finished. And there is that miracle that occurs where you send out the articles, and then you sit there and you wait and you go, there's nothing here, that we're not going to have a paper, and then they all just come back in again. It's an astonishing thing. I'm sure it happens every single day on an actual newspaper. But they all go out, you send them all out, and they all come back in again, and then you got to fit them into the paper. And we do a 36-hour day where we'd typeset them all, and then somebody had to take them down to Navan. It's insane the way that we used to do this. So we literally had to print the thing out, cut it together, glue the sheets together, and bring them to Navan so they could be printed. That's how they had to work. So it's ludicrous when you think about it.
Wow, I mean, that's and in terms of, was there ever kind of a sense of pride in kind of, you and Pat Leahy and the rest of the crew getting your names out there, kind of thing? Ever a sense of pride about that?
Pride in what? Pride in the paper doing well, or pride in ourselves being the big men on campus? Which is good pride or bad pride? Which do you mean?
Maybe both simultaneoly. Was that going
entirely on? Both? Yes. I mean, it was a good paper, like, or whatever, and it was professional, and there we ran good stories and all that stuff was good. But yeah, of course, yeah, we were 23, we were knocking around campus, like, whatever, it's grand. We dumped the papers off, like, whatever. We Yeah, honestly, look, we'd come from debating. We're delighted with ourselves. It was only when we left the university we realized that, particularly debating, you realize that people all thought you were idiots walking around, and worse than that, wankers walking around in tuxedos around the campus. So, but at the time, yeah, we're thrilled with ourselves. But the thing has endured, and the kind of standard we set has been topped by others and evolved further. So yeah, it was a solid thing that we put down. But we absolutely took great delight in it. Because we were kids and we're doing this thing, so that was felt like it was kind of a professional operation. And also then because we were able to grab people who we knew were really, really good, and then who've laterally gone on to become the New York Times Afghanistan correspondent or whatever. That is quite great. So we had grabbed those people and they were the ones who were working with us. So it was a nice bunch. I mean, there's a lot to be said for creating a working environment where there's people in who you admire and enjoy working with, like whatever, and you're whip cracking stuff off each other. And I think that principle has kind of stuck with us for a while of going, I'd like to choose my career based on how fun it would be to be the people I'd be working with.
Right. I see. And in terms of, life in general in UCD, student days, etc., was it kind of relaxed or stressful, bit of all, different emotions? What was that like for you?
There was a lot of that. I mean, I was doing a very different thing. By that stage, I had gone through quite the journey academically. I did a talk recently in UCD. It's one of those kind of alumni type events. Myself and Pat actually had a chat about all this kind of stuff. And I coined a phrase which I keep thinking I'm going to turn into something in the show, which is I entered UCD with a bright academic career behind me, because I very much under-excelled academically from coming out for a maths degree, and I had a good first year, but the minute I discovered the activities side of the college, that all went by the wayside, and badly actually at one stage. But because I made a hames of it in terms of my exams in second and the finals, and then went to the university, and they kind of went to the department and they said, look, we'll let you do this again. So I actually, because I'd run an election that hadn't won and various things that happened, and it would be and they said, look, you can come back and do them again as a kind of an external student. And I got a chance to do my final year again, and thank Christ for that, because of that, I, not only for the silly reason of I got to do things like the University Observer and I got to do lots more debating and all that kind of thing, but I was able to actually learn something about the subject I went in to do. So anytime you see me doing anything like stargazing or, kids' books about space, it's because the department let me go and do those exams again and actually learn something about them properly, get some ownership of the subjects. So it didn't tally well. It didn't kind of mesh well with academic life, the kind of thing. I was one of the people who really got absorbed in the non-academic part of university, and that didn't work out, and then they let me do it again, and I kind of saved the day at the last minute. But it was it wasn't great. But it was the same as it was presumably for everywhere. I mean, you went into UCD presuming that you had to get degrees because there was no jobs or you'd have to emigrate. That bit was quite distinct at the time of the 90s, the sense of, oh God, the minimum you need is a degree to even get a job these days at all. And so we were kind of, there was that floating over us all, like whatever. But it was, the same as I presume that it always is, there was a cherry blossoms would appear on the walk from the arts block to the restaurant, and that was your signal to start studying, that kind of stuff, and then the library would fill up, and we'd all be a bit stressed out. So I can't imagine that those things are any, are any less universal now than they were.
Right. And in terms of your degree, I believe it was maths and theoretical physics. Is that correct?
Yeah, maths and mathematical physics. Mathematical physics is what's called in UCD. The degree I did was called mathematical sciences. So kind of basically, rather than, it was an unusual science degree in as much as it should take 3. I took an extra 1 year, but rather than 4, and you kind of focus very strictly on the mathematical stuff. And so rather than doing the usual path to science, it's kind of like, oh, you guys just, are really into this, so let's just dump all the rest of the stuff and give you things. So yeah, it was maths and maths physics.
And did that have a considerable influence on your work today, particularly maybe your scientific writing?
Well, of course it did, but it was more that I came in. It was more of a symbol of what I'd been really into on the way up to university. I'd be
Yeah.
really into all this stuff, like whatever, and then enjoyed it. But it got incredibly technical, incredibly difficult, obviously, and then I found I had this other lure of all this kind of public speaking and gadding about the university, basically. So I had made, there's bits of it that I had always wanted to study and that I really made a bit of a mess of when I came in there, because I went too much on the social side of life, I suppose. But the fact that I got back to do it again, and the fact that it was basically a moment in the middle of the night studying at home the second time around where I got relativity, in quotation marks, where I went, okay, I see what's going on here, is probably why I've been able to do all these kind of sciencey stuff, because there was a point where I did actually go, okay, now I get it. This was worth the months of actually going through this. Like, whatever, I see what he was doing there. And that was a kind of a genuine moment of understanding. There's one genuine moment of understanding for that, and those exams went quite well eventually. But it was any of that stuff that I did later. I would not have done any of that stuff with the really bad degree I got first time out, with a really bad kind of. When I made a mess of it, I would have probably left the university really quickly, and with a grudge against it, and a sort of sense of, well, to university education. Whereas because I had a couple of extra years, I had a much more kind of warm kind of sense about academic life and academia, and was really happy to be surrounded by scientists later in my later career. It took a while, though. I mean, I'll be honest, it can happen that you go into university because you choose the subjects because it was a thing you loved when you were 14 and you thought this will be great, and you go to university and you learn at that kind of dense level. It takes something of the joy out of it. And that did happen for a while, that the pleasure I'd gotten from maths and physics for years got sort of beaten out of me a bit by doing it, like by focusing completely on it. And it took a while for the joy to return in it all. I'm delighted to say it's totally back now, because literally, as I do this conversation with you, I am stacking images of Jupiter that I took last night. So while we're doing this, I am processing astro images on another window on the computer. So not that it's happening slowly, so it's not that I'm not focused on you, but it took a while to get the love of it back.
Right. Okay. And in terms of, it's interesting, yeah. And in terms of the, sort of mix between public activities in college and slightly more private activities, for instance, debating and co-editing a newspaper, one's maybe a bit more public, one's a bit more private. Is it maybe a bit similar to your work pattern today, in which you have the slightly more private scientific work and then the more public television hosting, etc.? Is that a significant parallel?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, certainly the most of the stuff I do now is, I suppose, by public, do you mean in front of an audience?
Yeah.
There's that. Most of the stuff I do now would be within that kind of, even the stuff I do. Probably, I suppose you could say the kids' books I write. I write loads of kids' books about science. That's a few months of sitting in a room synthesizing information. So there is a touch of that. So but honestly, a lot of what you do when you write a show is, yes, you spend 3 to 6 months sitting in the very room I'm in now, just throwing ideas at a wall, just you on your own, going, is that a thing? Is that a stuff? Can I do that? Is that and how would I and throwing the ideas yourself? And then you got to bring it in front of an audience. So there's always a balance between what you do to prep these things, which is more quiet and more more preparatory, I suppose. And then the bit where you actually perform it. When you perform it, you are often giving the final. It's the final stage of the process, whereas a lot of it is on your own with a bottle of wine at 2 a.m, just flinging ideas at a wall. So there's a bit of that anyway to it. But certainly when I went into UCD, I had no idea that I wanted to be standing in front of a crowd of people. That was of all the things that I learned in university, that was probably the thing that was turned out to be most important, more important than any newspapers, more important than any maths. It was standing in front of a crowd, and it got to the point I didn't know that existed as a sensation or as a need. And then I did a freshers debate in second year, in which I told a joke at the start, after having watched debates to first year and going, oh, that looks interesting, I got to try that. And I told a joke at the start of it, and I got a laugh, and it was this like whoosh of adrenaline. And I went, well, that is weird. I never had that sensation before. What's that? And then I found that I love crowds. I love standing in front of crowds. And there would be a point where I would walk around the arts block if I was walking past an open door of a lecture theatre where there's like 600 first arts in doing English or something. And I saw that mass of people, I realized, not as 600 individuals, but as a thing. It was an audience. It was an actual animal in itself. I never ran down and started doing gigs randomly in front of loads of people who were waiting for their lecture to start. But you saw them as a potential for your joy. Okay, I could make that room laugh. I could make that animal in there, that six-headed animal in there laugh, and I'll feel great for doing that. And I didn't know that existed as a sensation. So so a large part of what you do in stand-up comedy is learning that it's, is how to work a room of people, because they become a different animal to them as individuals. And that was very, very much a thing that I started doing when I was in UCD.
And do you think sort of the balance you have between, for instance, scientific work and stand-up comedy, etc., do you think that equilibrium can sort of be applied to other walks of life, particularly professional walks of life?
No, I have no idea. I'm sure people. I would say that because my job is very much a passion of mine, which is a luxury that I have, a privilege I have that others might not, and then I was offered this other chance to do sciencey stuff, and what it is very, very basically, it feels like it's a different part of my brain to the stuff that does the comedy. So it's quite nice to have the two different things happening. But I am sure that the outlet for that for most people is whatever hobby they have outside their actual job. I mean, I think it is just a thing that we all naturally have, that we pick a thing different to what we do in our lives, as a way of releasing tension, as a way of letting off steam from one thing, and you go to the other, where it's a different part of your brain. That doesn't happen as much at your age, I'm afraid. That isn't a thing that really, you're just in a mad scatter of chemicals anyway at the moment, like whatever. But as you get older, you do tend to pick a thing which is a passion you have outside of work. And whether it's following a football team or whatever, needlepoint, who knows? But I have just been able to do those in very, very public ways. Science is very much, it's just a separate passion of mine. If it had to be, it would have just been a hobby, but luckily I was able to do it professionally. And I was able to take the skills, for example, from writing shows and flip them into writing books about science or presenting science shows. And the broadcasting skills I learned from one thing I was able to carry across. Yes, but it is basically, it's a chance just to, take a break from one and then bounce back to the other. Like they're both just very, very different things. And it's nice. People, I think, can see that I'm doing a different thing each time. But like, is the answer you get if I'm doing a funny interview, or if I'm doing a factual interview, it's a different part of your brain trying to formulate an answer. That's kind of nice to switch one off and then switch the other on.
And do you think both can ever sort of mingle with each other? I mean, for example, the science books have here's a fact and here's a silly kind of extrapolation of this. Here's a nonsense thing, like whatever. They're aimed at kids now, but there is you can. The only thing is, if you're doing something like a BBC Two science program, you can't be going on whimsical trains of thought, because people are tuned in to see the science part of it. And equally, if you're doing Mock the Week and there are science stories, you have to be careful not to be slipping into being an authoritative, factual voice, because actually that's taking the fun out of it. Like, so, and for yourself as well. Like, you don't want to be the headmaster that the other people are having the fun with, being the unruly class. You're also part of the unruly class. So there is an element of trying to make sure that I don't let them bleed into each other too much.
Which is grand. You kind of get used to having different. I mean, when I started off, I would do kids TV in the afternoon and then gigs in the evening. I went on to do a show called Echo Island kids show immediately after UCD. And you very quickly know that you can use different language in one than you can in the other, and you have to be careful to do that. But like I would do a 5:30 live show in the middle of RTE2's kids afternoon programs, like whatever, where I'm like chatting to 12-year-olds about the hobbies and stuff, and then I'd run from the studio, get onto a train, and I'd be effing and blinding on a comedy club in Cork, like, and you just had to, your brain just learned to switch between one and the other in terms of just what vocabulary you would use. So yeah, you get used to bouncing with one and the other. I mean, there's a problem if you mix them too much. I think it can be irritating for people.
And do you think that's something that can be applied quite well to areas like literature, for example? I don't know, maybe things like, gonzo journalism, that kind of thing.
It's interesting because that you look, you can have fusion of styles in many arts, but there's a danger you'll end up with some mélange that's either one or the other. I mean, like, I'm not a fan of there being too much formalism of these things and too much structure in this, like whatever but there are times where you want to let the brain make crazy connections, and there's times where you want to patiently explain something. And it can be awkward if you're doing this and your tone shifts in a way that people are like, well, I don't know what's happening now. I don't know if this is fantasy or reality that we're talking about. Like, I don't know if this is, if you're holding up the card that says this is currently nonsense, so just enjoy it for its own sake. And so I think it's awkward. There are different art forms have different rules, and they're there sort of as an aid for both creator and for audience. That, like, okay, this isn't going to get completely nonsensical. Because if you detach it, then if you take away the weight by just going, well, anything can happen. Literally anything can happen. Then when things happen, they have no weight. They have no kind of, and there's no kind of expectation that you can confound, or there's no kind of, because it's just anything happening. And that's why those kind of like Nouvelle Vague films or whatever, or overly surrealist kind of things have a tendency to be a little unsatisfying, because sure, listen, if anything can happen, then literally anything can happen. So I think you have to work within certain rules for different art forms, if this is making any sense at all.
Yeah, no, exactly. And in terms of, I suppose, again, when you were in UCD or even beforehand, were you particularly influenced by any, extremely artistic works as well as scientific works, maths, etc.?
Well, let's not overstate how influenced I was by scientific works when I was in UCD, because let's face it, I wasn't the most stellar thing. I mean, a lot of what I learned came later, because I was getting through exams. But like, if you imagine the science degree that I did in UCD, it was very much, they would regard as the first 3 years of a 7-year training, whereas I really only did those first 3 years. So I learned a lot of methods, lots and lots of methods, of mathematical methods, and very few actual results. The results, I presume, were all going to come later, after I'd learned how to understand them by learning all the methods. Unfortunately, I didn't hang around long enough to find all the cool results. The cool results then I just learned later, by finding out, by jumping to the end of the book. But but in terms of what was happening in the arts, no, we in UCD, I would say that in UCD we kind of were in our own bubble. I mean, I would say the weirdest thing about my 5 years in UCD is that I had no idea what was happening a lot of the time outside UCD. There's entire things I missed that when I emerged from UCD, they had come and gone. Take That had come and gone. The Nintendo 64 had come and gone. It's when then we merged into the real world in like 95, when I was about 23, and we all moved into a house share in Dublin. And then suddenly we had to go back into the real world. UCD was a very, very warm, cozy place to be, but it was its own little universe. And so entire tranches of history, the earth kept turning as we were in UCD. We didn't notice it for large chunks of it.
Yeah, and on that note, were there any particular, I suppose, maybe recent historical moments domestically or internationally that you may recall and had a reaction to, and your peers as well had a significant reaction to back then?
The one I would say was a major thing for us in 95 was the divorce referendum. Because the divorce referendum, no more than your own generation in the last two referenda, the divorce referendum was a huge thing because it was held on a Friday. And that simple move meant that the house share I was in, for example, it was actually Pat was there as well. He moved back. He went back to Tipperary to vote. There's another guy with us. He went back to Donegal to vote. I went off down to Wicklow to vote. And so then we gathered again on the Saturday to watch the votes come in. And it was literally as they announced each kind of what's called constituency, the vote swung between yes and no. And then it was only because there was a Dublin constituency was late to declare, and it was on no, and then Dublin constituency declared, and that swung it back into yes. And that felt like a huge thing because we were all 23 at the time, and it felt like we had taken like not quite control, but our voices were being heard in terms of shaping the nation. Same as you guys had, presumably, when the other two referenda occurred. I'm not sure if you're I don't know what age you are, 22 or 21.
Yeah.
But you would have voted in one or both of those?
Yeah, well, I mean, a lot of people were voting, and I believe, did I vote? I can't remember. I tend to be a bit divorced from referenda.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Okay,
well,
great. Well, listen, in the grand sweep of history, it'll turn up in the books at some stage. For us, that was a big deal. That was it felt like a step away from an Ireland that we had not asked for and had been presented to us into an Ireland, in the Ireland we wanted. And it was an interesting one when the further referendums occurred. When the latter ones, the ones that recently, the marriage equality, for example, came out, the church were going, "Oh, we really didn't know that this was, that we were this out of touch." And we're going, "Lads, in 1995, you're out of touch. This thing started way before you did. We asserted this a decade and two and a half decades ago." So that was a big deal. I remember at 95, but a lot of it was just we're kids, we're just making our way. Sorry, that makes it sound like it was Friends or something, which also started at the same time. But it was just people in house shares, and just rent wasn't insane, and there were scraps of work to get, and we were all kind of like trying to just dogfight our way. Honestly, I thought the UCD was a spectacular 5 years of my life, followed then by an even more interesting 5 years, which are the first 5 years of your career, where fingers crossed, you start to get bits of pockets of work, and you begin to feel a little bit like a grown up. And there's the bits about it which are infuriating. There is genuinely a quarter life crisis thing, because you will go from being whatever degree you get or whatever, standing ahead in the university, to making tea in an office surrounded by actual grown-ups. And I think there is an element of, you then start the clock on your age again. Whenever you leave whatever academic institution you're in, it's like a chess clock. You hit on the top and zero starts again, because you are now no years old, because you have to start to relearn how to be a grown-up. So because it's a very artificial situation we find ourselves in in a university. It's great and it's fantastic, and you'll never know more about a subject than you will, etc., etc., etc. And it's a wonderful kind of hothouse of a lot of ideas, and it'll change in many, many ways. But when you go out into the actual working world, or real world, I totally felt like I was a 1-year-old again, and I had to kind of learn how I had to actually grow up at that point, slow, and it's an interesting sort of thing. Like, whatever, I think it's how would I best put this? It was those first 5 years straight out of university were just an amazing. This is all new, and this is incredible, and sure, listen, what can stop us? And then, and then you realize, oh no, it's just like this goes on for a long time. There's lots more of this. So it was a good time afterwards.
And in terms of the, as you mentioned, kind of some people realizing that maybe they're in the real world kind of thing, how do you think some people would react to that in different, would there be particularly dark reactions, extreme reactions, or in your?
Oh, well, look, it was the case, and I'm not sure if the situation is still the case, that when I said I blithely threw out the term quarter life crisis, yes, there was. I think there is evidence that, excuse me, mid-20s are a difficult time for a lot of people. I was only semi-drinking. There is an element of, you walk out of a system which has basically measured your value in a very, very clear and tangible way. Here you go. Here are some A's. Here are some A pluses, whatever. And now you're in university. Here are more grades, and you go into a much more rootless, if you understand, RWT, rootless, kind of a much more untethered form of life where people aren't, regularly handing you a piece of paper with 8 questions on it and go, all you have to do is do these 8 questions and we'll tell you you're great, and I think it is kind of weird. It's tough, and it can be, and people I know can find that very, very difficult. It is, I think, a feature that people, they wear. There's a spike, as far as I know, in attempted suicide, depression figures among people who in that thing. It can be a difficult time as well. And I remember a while ago on Twitter, which is usually a joyless, dumpster fire of a place, asking people, going, what age actually is it all right at? What age does life, or what age are you now and how are you finding it? And there was a surprising amount of fellow feeling, which is like, okay, look, your 20s, you're just trying to prove yourself, and you're worth, people regard you as being worth nothing. Your 30s, you're sort of there, but relationships are happening, and you've got small children, and now you can't sleep. Your 40s are okay because you're kind of a little bit more centered in who you are, like whatever. In your 50s, you're scared because the people behind you are coming up and younger people, and they want to take your job. In your 60s, then you're worried about retirement, and your 70s are okay. It was really the evidence coming in from all generations basically was we should all be a lot kinder to each other, because at every stage of life, at every decade of it, it is riddled with challenges and different challenges. And it is, the 20s are no better than anything else. I think the 20s are prone to leave people leaving incredibly insecure. So, we have to be sympathetic towards that. I mean, look, and you take these problems and multiply them by COVID. And yeah, I have a lot of sympathy for young people at the moment.
And in terms of the insecurity for a lot of people in their 20s, do you think that maybe powerlessness might be a feeling that, politically or otherwise, or would it be more emotional, personal factors? I mean, obviously,
all of it could be a factor to it. But I think a large part of it is that you come from a very structured environment, and you come from a very, very structured path into the far more loose way that we navigate through the real world, because there is a tendency to think when you're a teenager that life is defined by those leaflets that you have in the career guidance office in your school, in which there's a block of 70 leaflets that have the jobs. All of the jobs are on the leaflets, and you pick the one that you sound interested in. It says, to become a blank occupational therapist, you must do this, 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 and this. And you go, oh, okay. And then you realize, oh no, it's a far more, complicated path through all these things. And so it's I think the world is far more complicated than we tell people, because we tend to narrow it down to, look, if go and achieve this, go and achieve that, like whatever. And the only time we correct this, bizarrely, is when the Leaving Cert results day happens. And then lots of people send tweets going, I didn't have a good Leaving Cert and I've done very well for myself. And it's kind of like, okay, well, you've sort of humble bragged there, really. But that's literally the only time we add a corrective into work really hard and then you'll achieve all the things you need to achieve, but you won't if you don't work really hard. In fact, the world is a lot more complicated than that, but also a lot less apocalyptic. There's a lot, when you're in school, you're told, oh, look, if you don't do this, nothing good will come of you. To be honest, nothing really, people manage. People get through it all, like whatever. In 20 years' time, they'll have family, kids, the house, they'll shrug and go, well, this was this, and I do this, like whatever, and they'll have a perfectly, normal life, like whatever. All the times you were told in school, no, if you don't do this, it'll awful, it'll be terrible in a kind of apocalyptic way. All that motivational tool. Turns out people manage. It is. We do get through this, but it can be a gear change, a weird gear change, if you're just very used to a very structured path.
Right, okay. And in terms of, that's wise words indeed. Now, in terms of...
Who knows? Who knows if they're truly wise? Or honestly, you just get a little bit, you pick up a tiny thing of backwards. Because I don't know now how to navigate the bit where I go from 48 to 50. So the wisdom only extends retrospectively. And also, what you will do is what everyone will do, which is they will totally ignore this, because that's what you do if a 48-year-old tells you stuff that they think is wise. Here's what I learned. People go, screw you, old man. You're you're just another white, middle-aged, middle-class man. What do you know about my life? And you know what? Fair enough. You all have to do that. You all have to find your own way through it.
Do you not think that there's a bit more of an awareness from young people about people maybe in their late 40s, early 50s, etc., on the difficulties that they may feel, or would it still be maybe.
God, who knows? I have no idea. I have no idea what the awareness levels of young people are about anything really at the moment. Who knows? I don't. As a rule, get to hang out with them. I get to hang out with younger than that people, because I'm on a school run with kids, like whatever. So they haven't shown an enormous amount awareness of it, but they're 4 and 9, so therefore that's not their gig. But it's a so no. Look, I've no idea, but nor to a certain extent should be. I mean, you're shaping the world in your image. Like that's you're right. I mean, there is a point when you're at this age that you should, please God, get to feel immortal and get to feel that you could do anything. This is kind of a weird thing that there's a huge debate about confidence that goes on, and about earned confidence and unearned confidence, and tied in with privilege. That literally costs nothing to tell a school of kids at assembly every day, look, this school has always produced wonderful people. They've always done really, really well. You're just the next group and you will make the country in your image. But it's a weird thing that for some reason, some places don't. And it honestly costs, it's a bizarre thing. I mean, it's just to give them that confidence, give them that infusion of confidence. That was, again, like, we're back to that campaign we had, or those articles in the Observer. One of the reasons people weren't going to UCD is because they didn't feel they could, because no one was saying to them, yeah, of course you can go to UCD. There's literally no reason why you shouldn't. Just fees are for you. They're like, it's free fees for you, same as everyone else, and you could do it. But they weren't told that was a possibility for them. And that is insane. Costs literally nothing to tell people that they can do it, that they can do this. And that's just a weird thing.
And in terms of, you mentioned the difficulty of, for instance, bridging from 48 to 50. Are there any things in particular?
Oh, fuck me, man. I'm just picking a random thing. I don't yet know what they are. Short of 2 bad knees, I'm not quite sure exactly what they are. So, and also I'm not a man. I'm not going to go, oh, my life is incredibly tough, because I've been very lucky. I've been able to do a thing I adore for 25 years now. So I'm in a very good position. COVID hit everyone really, really badly. But you'd have to say that someone who's already got a chance to, say, tour for 15 years, I'm in a better state than a comic 15 years earlier than me, whose turn it was. So that is, all work disappeared for me over the last 6 months, but I had just finished a tour. So in that regard, or I'd only had like 10 dates left of a 180-day tour. So in that regard, please don't portray me as someone who's complaining. I've been very lucky in terms of timings of things and how it's gone. I've been able to do a thing I adore, like, for years now, way past. If I was in a band as opposed to doing comedy, if I was in that part of showbiz, I would be reminiscing now about, hey, wasn't it great we were in a band 20 years ago and then we had 2 albums out and then that was the end of it? Like, that's the level of thing. But comedy goes on forever. So, please, I'm not poor mouthing myself in any way.
Well, I suppose on that note then, in terms of your comedy, I suppose the link between comedy and scientific understanding, I know you've talked about this before, but it's extremely interesting. Could you describe that in your view?
I would say that the most obvious thing is that comedy is often an argument. The kind of thing I do. I don't do character comedy. I don't do thing. I'm standing on stage telling a story or making an argument, about something. And so sometimes the techniques you use are very similar to the ones that you might use in a mathematical argument, specifically things like reductio ad absurdum, where you take an initial presumption and then you follow it till it creates a contradiction. And you use that all the time in mathematics to disprove things. You say, well, let's presume that there are only a finite number of rationals. So therefore, if there are, then this, and this, and this, and therefore, bang, 1 equals 2. And you go, see? And so you do that a lot in comedy as well. You go, well, what if blank I did this? Then therefore this, and you take the steps and it gets increasingly ridiculous. So you play it for laughs. There isn't an end point. You just play it for laughs, the madness of a thing. So you often do that in comedy. We don't call it reductio ad absurdum. We don't say we're using a mathematical technique, but you use those kind of arguments because people will follow an argument. I used to do a lot of routines about how ridiculous certain things were, certain, let's say pop science things, or not pop science, like psychics, astrologers, all that kind of stuff, like whatever. And it was an argument. I was going with this. Well, if this is the case, then bang, bang, bang. Then why would you? Then therefore this would happen, and laugh from the ridiculousness of it, like whatever. So you use those, but they're only really good. Actually, you only really kind of recognize this in retrospect. You don't ever sit and go, I will now use these mathematical techniques to write my comedy. It's only you realize, oh, hang on, yeah, that's an argument. I see that I've done that. It's only kind of, you do it in a way, the same thing you do it conversationally. You don't set out to do it, but like it just occurs like that. But so comedy has a logic, comedy has a structure. I mean, we're back to, if you make things just surreal, it's a very difficult thing to, how do you rein in the degree of it? How do you make, once you put a fish on a bicycle, like then all bets are off, and actually the audience are left going, well, what am I, what is this reacting against, if you know what I mean? Like so if there have to be some sort of rules for you to be seen to be breaking them, or to let the audience presume what's happening and then change it. You have to so you have to let the audience be stepping ahead of you in order to, or either to get the thing right, which is also a delight sometimes, or to get it wrong, and to confound them slightly. But there are structures and rules to it, like whatever. But the only thing is, it's not, it always sounds, people are desperate, journalists, when they write these, they're desperate to go, oh, but then you must use mathematics. No, you don't use it to write it. It just, you can see when you go back and look over it that some of these things are the same. There's a lot of it is about how much information you give the crowd and how much you withhold. And how much you withhold until you say it, until you let it dawn upon them. There's all these kind of little techniques that, you could say were rules. But one thing I've also found is every industry likes to think it has rules in a kind of there's a bit in Ocean's 11. Have you seen Ocean's 11?
I don't think so, but other people.
No, Ocean's 11 is a heist movie, right? And one of the things they mock in Ocean's 11 is the fact that they have names for all these things. There's a sequence where they go, well, look, we'll need 2 Molly Browns and a Chicago slide, and these stupid kind of fake criminal names for, well, the Molly Brown is when you've two different people who get to swap their identity or whatever. Who knows what the hell it is? It's never explained, but like, it's just sweet. It's just a nice joke that these career criminals would have these shorthand names for things, like whatever. And equally, comedy occasionally, oh, well, we've got our rule of 3 and pull out and reveal, and that that all this thing is like kind of we all go, oh yeah, well, I reckon it's a technique you've used there. And there really isn't. There really isn't. It's nothing. I think all trades like to think they have some sort of secret language that they can speak in, that different proponents of it can speak in, but ultimately we're all on stage throwing a pie in our own faces.
Yeah, right, I see. Okay, and in terms of following on from that, the similarities between journalism and scientific research, particularly maybe investigative journalism, hypotheses, building solid theories or cases, for want of a better word. What are your thoughts on that idea?
Look, it would be ideal if that was the way journalism progressed, but it's also, journalism is also shouting into a marketplace. And so it'd be lovely if somebody went on Twitter and said, well, actually, blank. And everyone went, oh, okay, well, we've entirely changed our mind now. But that isn't the case. A lot of it is what is happening is just throwing an argument out that will reassure people of a thing they already believe anyway. And a lot of it is just paid confirmation bias, because it's very difficult to establish an actual truth in certain things. Certainly in human things, there is no, if we knew the actual result of which work better, left or right, then we would just do it, I suppose. But actually, there isn't. Some people feel this trade-off is more valuable than this trade-off, like whatever, and that. Even the most ideal version we have of that is that, well, we've tried this for a while and now let's swing this, we'll try that for a while. And if you took it, like the most generous overview is, okay, grand, that should be maybe what happens, that they act as a corrective to each other. But any sense of people going, okay, well, I suppose that didn't work for a while, has gone. And now it's like a turf war. And so it's, and you see in very polarized societies that if there was any element to which people are trying to actually make an argument of something, it's totally gone now. And like in a Fox News kind of way, like whatever, it's just cheerleading, a lot of it, like whatever. I don't think that's necessarily the case in Ireland, and I think there's a touch of it in England, but I don't think newspapers' political allegiances are painted on their sleeves as they are in Britain, and certainly as they would be in America. But there is an element to which, like whatever, nobody's is actually going, oh, touche, good point. No articles end with a QED. It is just people back up their gut on things, and look, maybe that's the way it has to be. Maybe the way on all human things, there is no absolute truth. So basically, it's a head count of where people's guts are, and any of the rest of it, any of the arguments given, don't change any minds in any way. We just remain with a certain gut sense of this is how I'd like, I am more in favor of this than the other. I'm more in favor of big government and high taxation, and now I'm more in favor of, the kind of less intrusionist kind of whatever. But I will justify this gut thing, which is just a gut thing. Honestly, all you're doing is you're measuring people's bile and phlegm at some stage, and then putting it in a kind of a much more lofty way. And talking in terms of graphs and charts, but actually they just back up people's sense of it. That's kind of an idea that people are just kind of really just kind of feel this should be the way it should be. So, I will listen to whoever will give me a sort of intellectual framework in which to justify that. So I don't know. That may be, unfortunately, all that's ahead of you. You'll realize that the grown-up world is just, we're all stupid, but we just back ourselves up with a bit of selected evidence, and then that allows us to sleep at night. I don't know.
I suppose just maybe if you've time, just one little last question.
Go on.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, did you see the University Observer going anywhere in particular? Where exactly would you like it to go from here?
Oh, look, I have no intention to step and say into that. I would like you to maintain certain standards in terms of being out regularly, being professional in your outlook anyway. Whether that'll happen, I'm sure there'll be good years and bad years, same as there would at any other time. But that the benchmark is you keep coming out. That's enormously important. That it has to keep coming out, right? And we'll get this thing out and we'll do the work like whatever. And so that's, in many ways, it seems weird, but that's honestly the most important. Obviously, don't just make it. I'd like it not to be a right-wing polemic every week or whatever. I don't know. I'm sure there's nightmare versions it could be, or whatever, or to be taken over by, surprisingly taken over by a hardline organization of some description. But the key thing is, like whatever, get different voices in is obviously very, very important, but get the thing coming out. That'd be important. But yeah, if you can campaign, that'd be great. That'd be fantastic. But I'm not going to tell you what your agenda should be in any way. I don't, I'm just going to step back in every so often, pick up a copy of it and see how you're doing. And then what I'll do is obviously I'll go, no, it's not as good as it was, because that is the privilege of age and having been there before. It's like they published a history of the debating societies about 15 years ago that had every few years somebody would write about that period of time, and we all read a little bit of the past and our own bit and nothing after that. Because that's just some kids. Like, we don't care about them. Sure, they don't know. They know nothing. That is honestly one of the, sad privileges of getting older. You get to dismiss people as being not as good as your generation were.
Well, everyone, there you have it. A very special thanks to Mr. Ó Briain for appearing on this podcast, and a very special thanks to Conal McGonagall for editing this episode. Now, stay tuned for our next episode of Alumni Chats, in which we interview historian Diarmaid Ferriter. Now remember, this podcast is brought to you by the University Observer. Thanks for listening.